as the coronavirus spreads across the world, misinformation about the virus is being shared online, and some of it could be coming from foreign governments or other actors.
A top State Department official told the Washington Post last week that Russia has been creating false personas to spread misinformation on social media. So joining us now is CNET senior producer Dan Patterson with more on this. So Dan, I'm really happy you're here. You have made me kind of like a warrior against misinformation, and I am perpetually disappointed in the number of people that I see spreading things that I consider obviously false. So let us talk about this. The Washington Post, the State Department told the Washington Post that Russia is behind swarms of online false personas or personas. What is that?
Okay, so as social media has evolved, smartphones have become ubiquitous. These are no longer luxury items. This has become essential communications infrastructure. Unfortunately, that infrastructure has been exploited. In the past, we saw this with political influence operations. Now we are seeing this related to the coronavirus, and it's incredibly important that we separate out the good information from this disinformation. And it's important to call this disinformation because disinformation implies intentionality. So what we are seeing here, what the State Department is seeing, the Global Engagement Center, which is a part of the State Department, has noticed information coming from the GRU, the IRA, and other components of the Russian government that interfered in the 2016 election. So I don't know that I would say swarm, because this again plays into the sense of fear that people are feeling. So I don't want to judge how people feel, but let's take a look at the activity here. And we are seeing what the social media industry calls coordinated inauthentic activity. Now, the reason we call this coordinated inauthentic activity is that it involves botnets which spread information automatically. This is automation. It also involves real people sitting behind fake accounts, meaning they are designed to look like American accounts. They often use VPNs so that the geotags say the United States, but these are people with a political agenda sitting in an office, much like we sit in offices, designed to spread misinformation or disinformation using Twitter, Facebook, and other large social networks.
This is like sort of greatest hits of misinformation, though. Didn't we see this in 2016? Didn't we already know what the MOs are, and why aren't we catching them?
Yeah, so the social media industry has been aware of this activity for a long time. In fact, not just related to politics. In fact, a few years ago, we saw a company called Devumi caught for selling fake followers. There is an industry of influencers who will buy influence. So the social media industry, particularly Facebook and Twitter, has been aware of this problem for a long time, but this is still being exploited to spread disinformation about the coronavirus.
Let me ask you about manipulated media, something that Twitter is trying to roll out. We saw that this weekend over a tweet by Dan Scavino, President Trump's campaign manager. He tweeted out a video that they say was manipulated, and they tagged it as such. Although it was kind of buggy, because I saw the reporting, and then I looked at my timeline, and I didn't see the label. I went to his timeline, didn't see the label. So how does it work? And I guess, can users of Twitter, of social media, have faith in something that is labeled manipulated media? In other words, we keep talking about fake personas and fake information, misinformation that is out there, but I guess people are also going to want to know is when a social media company slaps a label on something, can I trust that? Because is that biased? Is that coming from a level of misinformation or dishonesty? How are we to know?
You know, Vlad, you said a key word there, trust. So Twitter has rolled out this feature called where they tag posts with alleged manipulated media. Now, if we rewind to about a year ago, this word deepfake we heard a lot. In fact, that information or deepfakes were applied to CBS News content. We saw deepfakes used for Mark Zuckerberg and Nancy Pelosi, other political figures. Now, deepfake implies this kind of technologically sophisticated thing that looks like one thing but is another thing. Now, Twitter's manipulated media is kind of an evolution of this, and what you're getting at, Vlad, is that a post doesn't have to be totally manipulated. It can be small alterations that, just like if you change one word in a sentence, it can change the meaning of the sentence. You can do the same thing with manipulated media. The problem here is that when Twitter and Facebook get into the game of saying this is manipulated, this is not, you can see disinformation propagated that doesn't have that tag, or bad actors can move more rapidly than Twitter, Facebook, and the others are able to respond, which leaves consumers, leaves you and me and everyone else looking at posts that don't have that label, feeling, gosh, okay, this must be authentic because it doesn't have that label. So we're all kind of in this really tight spot where we see bad actors manipulating content, and social media firms, the only thing they can do is respond.
So I just want to ask you about Dan Scavino, the president's social media manager, and his tweet. When that tweet got flagged as manipulated media, he retweeted. He retweeted. The video was not manipulated, and what Twitter was saying is that, perhaps those words were. I don't want to give the video oxygen, but it had to do with former Vice President Biden. The Vice President at some point uttered some of these words, but the way that they were strung together gave it a different context and a different meaning. He says it's not manipulated. So this is the push and pull that I'm sort of talking about. If somebody comes back and says no, these are not the droids you're looking for, right? And people are going to say, well, what do I believe? Do I believe
that's
these
exactly
people?
Right. Yeah, and
I guess that's the point.
In fact, the intent, Anne-Marie, you're exactly right. That is the intent of not just Russian bad actors, but we've seen these tactics because they're inexpensive and easy to do at large scale. We've seen these tactics deployed domestically by domestic actors for political purposes. We've seen them deployed for business purposes. We see them not just in the United States. We see these tactics deployed all over the world. And of course, coronavirus is not just a U.S. problem, it is a global problem. And when we see disinformation propagated, it can oftentimes target municipalities. It can target local cultures. In fact, this study by the Global Engagement Center studied 3 weeks of Twitter content, and they found that 7% of the conversations were inauthentic. 7%. That's a massive amount of the discussions happening on Twitter. So again, Vlad, to your point, that this really just amplifies the divisions that already exist, and it can kind of grind down the polarity, or create polarity and kind of grind down the discourse and make, well, my side versus your side, and who's to say which side is right?
Really, really quick before you leave, just to go back to the coronavirus, I just want to give people tools when they do get online. Do we know what types of falsehoods are being spread, or what people can do to identify a questionable tweet or whatever?
Yeah, so Anne-Marie, you've asked the million-dollar question, and that gets to the word Vlad used, trust. So again, social media infrastructure has become critical communication infrastructure. It is really important that we do not believe everything that we instantly scroll past and see on social networks, and that we trust organizations that have vetted their content. There really is not a ton we can do, although social networks have built in these mechanisms to flag and report content. Often those mechanisms are exploited by brigades, large groups of people who want to flag authentic content and drive it down as well. So the real thing that we can do is make sure that we are following content that is by reliable, trustworthy actors, and not necessarily believe the things that we want to believe, but believe the things that are vetted and fact and science-based.
But Dan, what happens though? So it's such an interesting point. I mean, my parents are in their 70s; they're not on Twitter. And I sometimes see tweets, and I'm like, "This is this is completely not true." And I'm glad that my parents who are in their 70s are not reading this stuff. And yet, the President of the United States on February 26 said this. He said that the number of people infected in the United States by the coronavirus is going very substantially down. That's a quote, not up. Okay, and that is not true. And so that message is then on television. It gets reprinted in newspapers, and then it gets into Twitter. It's not true, but people are saying, well, I didn't even get it from Twitter. I got it from the man in the Oval Office.
That's what makes us so vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right?
I can't prescribe a solution here.
I know,
all we
Dan,
can do,
fix it. Fix it, bro.
All we can do is identify the mechanics, and I hesitate to use this word viral, but social networks have been built on viral mechanics. They've been built so that content can be amplified with very little friction. And of course, that ends up in, Vlad, the industry term is earned media. That ends up in actual media content. Social media posts end up in actual media content. So again, it's important that we here at traditional media outlets do our homework and that we look at the facts, and we try hard here at CBS News and our colleagues in the media. But it's really important that when we see misinformation and disinformation, that we try to identify it, flag it, and do our best not to amplify it. It's on everyone watching and all of our friends and relatives to make sure that we do the same thing.
I try. I try to fight the good fight. That's a family
I do.
argument.
She does try to fight the good fight.
So do you.
I don't have people in my timeline like in hers on Facebook like putting really weird things, but she does, and she tries to like fight it, and it's like a losing battle.
Yeah. Dan, thank you so much.
Good to see you.